Okay, check one, two, check one, two. Testing, testing. Hopefully, you can hear me okay. I have made dramatic improvements, hopefully, to the audio. So please let me know in the live chat if the audio is significantly better than before. I have worked on it quite a bit. Um, if you did not see the live stream last week, it was one of my favorites. It was about Lee Cronin and his talk with Lex Fridman about assembly theory. And unfortunately, had horrific audio issues. And I've been battling audio issues for a while, different versions of that. And I have had a buzzing in the audio for quite some time, ever since I got my new computer, and I figured out that it was the adapter for the cord for my microphone today. I have tried every setting to get rid of it, and it has not worked, and I'm pretty sure that I got rid of it. So please comment in the chat if it is, much better. But, let me know. Today I want to talk about knowledge versus wisdom versus faith. There's a lot of things that I wanted to talk about tonight, and I wrestled until the last minute with what I was going to talk about. We were going to either navigate the Tree of Toes, which we'll probably do next week, since we're not doing it this week, and or we we're going to do this one, or I was just going to do an Ask Me Anything. I am doing this one and also kind of an Ask Me Anything. So if there is anything that you want, me to discuss, please let me know in the chat box or the live chat. But I am going to try and do at least semi-periodically an audience request. So I'm going to be posting on the community page on YouTube, I guess, a poll on different topics. But to get that poll started, please comment in the comments below this video what is a topic that you would like me to cover. So I want to get back into not just doing commentaries. We're still going to do those, but I want, like I said, at the beginning of this year, I wanted to start including kind of more of the old school type of streams where we just pick a topic. But this one is an important one, and I think that it came up in the last live stream that I did. The link to the much better the version with much better audio that I re-uploaded of the commentary on Lex and Lee's discussion is below. But in that, Lex Fridman asks Lee Cronin, is there room for God in assembly theory? And Lee responds with, it basically saying, kind of this throwaway statement of, oh, well, God exists in our minds because we define God, right? And that's just not an honest answer. It's not a true answer because it doesn't answer the question that was intended to be asked. But what he also said was that he's not an angry atheist. He was an atheist. He considers himself an atheist, which atheism, I used to consider myself an atheist for 24 years of my life. Now I'm a theist. But I've also realized that there's no such thing as atheism. And everybody says that. A lot of people say that. Jordan Peterson says stuff like that. And I don't like what they mean by it. And I don't mean what they mean by it. What I mean by there is no such thing as an atheist is that you cannot have no opinion, which is what people say atheism means. But in practice, it means a disbelief in God. But when pushed, or when Googled, the definition comes up as a lack of a belief in God. But you can't have no opinion, a lack of an opinion about the fundamental nature of existence because you interact with it every day. Do you believe it's sentient? It's a sentient someone, or do you believe that it is, inanimate dust? Whichever way you lean, you are either a theist or an anti-theist. And when I say anti-theist, people usually think I mean like you hate God or something, and that's not what I mean. It just means you disbelieve in the fundamentality of sentience, of existence, essentially. And so you can't be agnostic about God. You can't be an atheist, which means definitionally the same thing as agnosticism. But it's not in practice used the same way. So, but Lee talked about, like he said, I'm not an angry atheist, but I have faith in things, and so I don't think religious people are stupid, like a lot of people in the scientific academic establishment. But I do, because I do have faith in things as well. It's just not God, basically, is what he said. And I want to touch on that tonight and talk about it, because I think that we use all the wrong terms when it comes to describing our understanding of everything, of anything. And we use the term knowledge and faith and belief, and these are not always used in a way that is conducive to true fundamental understanding, I believe. And so we're going to talk about that tonight, because it's extremely relevant when we're going to be pushing forward and pushing the boundaries on what is science as we enter, I think, some people are calling it Science 2.0, which is a more an investigation into the fundamental theories. And so next week we're going to be going over the fundamental theories more. We're going to be describing their differences, the more fundamental theories than our current theories, I guess, is more universal theories than our current theories, and what those are and what defines the differences between them. And there's a gnat that is bothering me. But I think that it's important to get past this concept first, or get touch on this topic first, which is what is understanding and what are the levels of understanding. So, like I said, if you're watching this, please hit the like button. It helps fuel the algorithm. Please comment in any questions you have in the live chat, and we will get into it. So this is something that Lee Cronin also spoke about earlier, which he said, we can't understand general intelligence until we understand knowledge. Okay, so what is knowledge is what he thinks that we need to understand in order to understand intelligence. And I'm going to argue that this is not the case. And so I just Googled knowledge, and this is the definition of knowledge. It is facts, information, and skills acquired by a person through experience or education, the theoretical or practical understanding of a subject. Facts, information, and skills acquired by a person through experience or education. See, this is the problem. The problem is that it is facts. What is a fact? Information. What is information? Skills. We can understand what skills are. I think it's more intuitive. By a person through experience or education. These are not the same thing. Okay, and that's the problem, is that this definition of knowledge is too vague to actually be helpful. And so why this is the case is that wisdom is an entirely different thing than memorization. Understanding of something through firsthand personal experience is very different than understanding something through memorizing it via secondhand sources. And this is going to be very relevant as we get into Science 2.0, because a more fundamental theory is, all these more fundamental theories are going to get increasingly relevant towards recognizing and operating within the space of you and your mind being part of the system itself. And so if you look at a lot of these theories that we're going to get into next week, when we do Navigating the Tree of Toes, like observer theory, sentient singularity theory, um, uh, conscious agent theory, even assembly theory. These are all theories, constructor theory, that deal with the they either some of them more directly than others, but all of them much more directly than our current scientific theories are incorporating and focused on the idea that our mind and the structure of our mind is responsible for what we observe and how we process information. And so this is a much more first-hand, it recognizes much more so the first-hand experience of each and every individual in their role in the observation, I guess, and therefore the description of science, physics, chemistry, biology, morality, etc. We're gonna, it expands and expands, and this, as these more universal / fundamental theories, it's the same thing, are become more the focus of pushing our science forward. We're going to talk about that too, what that is. Then it also means that it's going to extend beyond the arbitrary boundaries that we currently have on what is included within science and what is usually thought of as outside of science. So morality is thought of outside of science currently, but it's what is science is what you really, and it's there's a couple different ways to look at it. You could say that it is a linguistic framework that comes from the attempt to understand the world via experimentation and maybe mathematics, but you could say logic, but logic is included in everything. Logic is included in the metaphysics of theology, and it's included in philosophy. I mean, it much more so than even science. I mean, it's the backbone of science. Not even so. I can't say much more so, but it's more the focus because it's kind of assumed in science. Science. This is the issue: is these terms that we use to convey understanding are not conducive to moving forward. They are holding us back, and so yeah, let's get into it. I'm going to open up an Excel sheet, and we are going to try and map this a little bit. This is going to be kind of a working session. It's not a commentary, so it's more open. If you have any questions at all, like I said, just put them in the chat. But here we go. My models. Let's see this. So here we have wisdom. I don't know how to spell, actually. I'm terrible. Knowledge. We'll just call this understanding. Faith. And what else is there? Say wisdom, knowledge, understanding. I guess that's probably belief. So these are terms that are all used to convey understanding in different ways. And so this is always firsthand. This is, by definition on Google, firsthand or secondhand. That doesn't make it helpful. You need these to be different. And this is no hand, usually, was what people think of it. But I think that this is not really accurate either. And belief is also pretty vague. So knowledge and belief are basically the same thing, but knowledge is assumed to be true, and belief is not assumed to be true. It is assumed to be accepted whether or not it's true. Okay? And I would say that that's the difference between those. But what knowledge would have to truly be is it would have to be information that you have that is secondhand, not firsthand, and is on a more fundamental level. Or if we're going to, like, I don't even know if that works, because to say I know something, I know that the sun will rise tomorrow, do I really know? Or do I believe that the sun will rise tomorrow? I don't know. It's tough because, like, I don't even want to use these terms when I'm describing that. But yeah, I mean, do you know the sun will rise tomorrow? Or do you believe the sun will rise tomorrow? That is an interesting question, because if I asked you each one of those questions on their own, you would just say yes to both of those and treat them identically, but they're not assumed when you juxtapose them next to each other to be the same. They're kind of a belief is given this kind of has this kind of assumption of ignorance almost, or like this doubt, sense of doubt behind it. When you say that's somebody's beliefs, it's like, oh well, you're saying that that's what they think. I don't even want to use that term, but that's what they think is that's what they think is. We're getting really fundamental. You don't even need to put anything after that. But you're not even tackling whether or not it is or not, whether or not their beliefs are true or not. And so this is more complicated than it seems. And it's funny because there's this meme online that I see all the time of people making fun of Jordan Peterson, and I like Jordan Peterson well enough. I've worked with him. I think he is a brilliant philosopher. I do. Doesn't mean he's right about everything. Nobody's right about everything. Nobody's perfect. There are plenty of things I disagree with him on, but my personal experience with him, my wisdom with that I have with of him, which I do have, having worked with him multiple times, I have a certain. I know things about, I guess you could say I know things about him, but he keeps his word. At least he has kept his word to me, and has always been genuine. And but there is this idea online, though, and it's not unfounded, of him just convoluting things to the point where it's like a mess. And he recently did this on Twitter, and I saw even the other day. And so when he was having a discussion, actually, also a while back, with Kurt Mungle, and Kurt brought up this quote that I have to Jordan Peterson, and it was that if you don't see God in your daily life, then, and you assume God to be true for the sake of argument, then you have to change your definition of God. Essentially, it means your definition is wrong. If you want to truly think about whether or not God exists, and your default assumption is that God does not exist, you have to, in order to truly think about it, it is a set process. There's not many ways to think about something. There's one way to think. That is it. And that one way to think requires that you take your default status or default assumption, assume the opposite of it is true, and then look for evidence of the opposite of your default status. You can't just look for evidence of your default status and say, let's say you think God does not exist, and then you look for evidence that God doesn't exist. That's not thinking. If you think God doesn't exist, you have to assume he does exist and then look for evidence of him. If you don't see evidence, then you have to re-examine your definition of God, because God, if God exists, then God is everywhere, and so therefore you would see evidence everywhere. And if you don't, then it means that you probably have a misunderstanding of God. But but when Kurt asked Jordan Peterson this, or brought this up, Jordan said something like, it depends on, we have to figure out what you mean by believe and what you mean by God. And he's not wrong when he does this, when he's like, well, that depends on what you mean by belief and what we mean by know and what we mean by God. This is something that we actually do have to do sometimes. And especially when we're trying to break new ground and figure things out that we haven't figured out yet. When it comes to common back and forth discussion about something that is already kind of understood, then it's usually not worth doing that, and it's probably counterproductive. But if you're going to figure something out that you haven't figured out before, then you have to actually get down to the root of how to construct the question that you want to even ask. You have to figure out what you want to figure out, and then, or you have to know what you want to figure out. Then you have to figure out how to ask the question that is going to give you the answer that you're looking for. So, and it does. We do have to break down what it means to believe in something, I think, going forward, and what it means to know, because the evidence that this is such a widespread problem, actually, and not just me nitpicking, or even Jordan Peterson nitpicking, is the fact that it is so obvious when you look at how many people think they understand the world after they come out of college, and they just don't. And we all have been, there in a similar spot where we think we understand, and because we've been told it's a certain way, something is a certain way, but by a source that we trust to be true, but we don't actually have firsthand experience with that, with concept or topic or idea that we're assuming, and then you do finally have firsthand experience with it, and you realize that you were wrong. And so that's something that hopefully is common to everybody, even if it's different circumstances, because if that's not, then you're not thinking. But belief and knowledge are things that we don't actually have a very good understanding of on a fundamental level. These two terms, wisdom, we do, and this is when Lee Cronin said we need to understand what knowledge is if we're going to understand AGI, or really what he just means is if we're going to understand what it means to be intelligent, then we have to understand what knowledge is. That's not true at all, actually. What we need to understand in order to understand intelligence is to understand wisdom. We need to realize that we don't understand knowledge because it's not specifically defined enough. It's not defined enough. Same thing with belief. And so this is kind of what we have to kind of get down to the root of, and think about this from first principles. And this I think will help people understand God, and also understand themselves, and understand how to learn and how to think, and even how to understand others much better, and show grace to people because you understand yourself better. All of these things can come from understanding these four terms a little bit better. And yeah, just thinking right now. So faith is, Lee Cronin said, I have faith in things. So uh, so he used that to back his reasoning that religious people, quote unquote, and I don't like even that term, but theists, better term, are not idiots, and or at least not different from him. in and I think that this is even probably wrong, at least for me, and I can't understand or um, completely the personal experience of another person, but I can tell you that I do not just believe in God. Ben Shapiro was once asked, "Do you believe in God?" And he said, "I don't just believe in God, I know in God. I know of God." Essentially. And I liked that at the time because I identified with it. But at the same time, there that that's because knowing is assumed, like I said, to be knowledge is assumed to be true. Belief is not assumed to be true or false, and it's not assumed to matter. And it's kind of, if anything, it's got a vibe of doubt. Okay, so um, he, I say more like I am aware of God, and awareness. We can maybe add that one to the list. Is also the same thing as wisdom, though, and because it comes from firsthand experience, and this is there's many different ways to know something, or there to have to acquire a position. Okay, there's like different ways to acquire a position. The different ways are logic. You can logic it out. You can be like, well, if this is the case, then that would be the case. You know, you can logic it out. And another way to do it is to get information from a trusted source that also connects with and fits well with other information that you have, and doesn't seem to contradict your worldview that does ultimately, hopefully, collapse back into firsthand experience. And so the third way would be personal experience, or just experience, firsthand experience. And so only two of these, though, are actually really should really be assumed to be part of the umbrella of understanding, which is logic and firsthand experience. You can't really include information from a secondhand source as part of understanding. They can be part of something. You can understand something that has been conveyed to you within the isolated framework that it has been conveyed to you, but you can't actually understand it fundamentally on a first principles level, unless you experience it directly or you logic it out. And so when people say, what do you believe about this, or what do you know about this, even I will be just as, I don't want to say guilty, but I'm just as I don't know. I do this exact same thing that everybody does, where I say this is my belief, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not. And I use the term belief if it's something that I'm not super confident about. But if it's something that I'm especially confident about, I do use the term I know. But they are still kind of interchangeable. So like I said, do you know the sun will rise tomorrow, or do you believe that the sun will rise tomorrow? These are different in what they convey to us because of the way that we have been using the terms historically, but they're not definitionally different. They don't seem to be. And so, I don't know. This is just very interesting to think about. Let me get to the chat. These are the best monologues. The joke is that if it is real. Yeah. Is real. Yes, very. I know. I've noticed that too. It's interesting. Fun times. Knowledge is what is known, written down. Literally, knowing ledger. Come on. Knowing ledger. Interesting. I didn't know that. But I was just about to Google it. I was just about to Google the like, you know, the breakdown of the meaning of the different parts of the words that are on my sheet here. But I have a knowing of God. It's the greatest gift. It is, and but I would say I have awareness of God. It's probably better, even more accurate. But I understand what you're saying, and that's the point. Is that this is why you can't understand intelligence by just understanding knowledge, because you can't really understand knowledge. There's knowledge is so contextualized. Its definition is contingent upon its context. And here is also an important thing to just remember throughout all of this is, you know, when you're going to get down to what is understanding of what? Meaning, like, the having of information and the understanding of information must be understood. It's just so you get so like in a loop when you're getting this fundamental and when you're trying to describe it. It's kind of, I don't know, it's entertaining sometimes, but it's also a little bit like repetitive. But information is context, is my point. And so what is information? It is context. That's what information is. There is no information outside context, like I've said many times, versus information inside of context. When it comes to fundamentality, there's just information is context. Information outside of context is only within kind of this like secondary detached framework that we have, you know, relativistic space that we exist in. But beyond relativity, there is no information outside of context and information inside of context. Because I could just give you an Excel sheet with a bunch of you know, I don't know, data in it, and to a bunch of numbers that's in the file, but then you're not going to be able to use that if you don't know what those numbers correspond to and what was the intention behind the origin of that information and the intention behind its, you know, creation. And so it's not information to you actually at all. You could call it information, but it's actually not to you. And it's like potential information versus, you know, kinetic information would be information that actually is understood by you, which is truly informative. That's what information does, is it informs. And if something, I don't even know what to call it, but if you get some information, I don't even know what word you would use, but I don't want to use that one. It's just I don't know what's a better one. And it doesn't inform you, then it's not information to you actually fundamentally. It's like potential information, but it's not kinetic information in that it doesn't move you. It doesn't form you. It doesn't inform you. So that's kind of the context that is even everything is, all these terms are under as well. So if you have understanding, below that you have information. Information is what? It is context. And then you have these other terms that are used in communication, and some of which are contextually dependent, and some of which are or definitionally contextually dependent. And then some are more the intrinsic in their definition. It's built into the word, like wisdom or awareness, versus knowledge and belief. Faith is also one that I would say it's kind of built in, but faith is something that is only really possible in a specific instance. You can't just have faith in just any circumstance that you could also have awareness of, essentially. And so I've said this, to get back to when Ben Shapiro said, I don't believe in God, I know in God. I would now say I'm aware of God instead of saying I know God of God. I'm aware of God, and you could also say I assume God because of logic, and I'm aware of God because of personal experience, and that is what formulates my my understanding of God. That's what goes into my understanding of God. And then, but people oftentimes use the term faith. Say, what is your faith? Oh, I am Jewish, or I'm Christian, or I'm Muslim, and these are even different, defined differently. What it means to be Jewish is not the same as what it means to be Christian, which is not the same as what it means to be Muslim. To be Muslim is to be in submission to God, and to act a certain way. Islam is a way of life, and Jewish is a group identity, and then there's Christianity, which is a cornerstone belief. They're not even the same thing, but we call them all religion, and so it confuses it all when we also call them faiths. But they're not. We shouldn't be using the term faiths for those, because I don't think that it's an accurate term, and it's assumed to mean that by many people, especially anti-theists or self-described atheists, usually when you say faith, they think that you believe in God without evidence, and you just want, which means like you just want to believe in God, and this just sets up the whole framework of this in a very inaccurate way. And so I don't like the term faith when it comes to just being used as a term to describe one's position on God or awareness of God. I've said before, and I think it's much more accurate to say, I have faith in God's assistance, not in God's existence. I am aware and I assume God's existence because of logic and because of personal experience. And I have faith in his assistance because he could choose not to help me. But we have to have faith that he will, because if you don't have faith that he will, then but you do have awareness of his existence, and you don't have faith in his assistance, that's a really bad place to be. Like that would not be a good place to be in at all. It's like inescapable. You feel that would imply that existence itself is intentionally against you, and there is no escape. And that sounds like that sucks. So I've never met anybody that is like that, though, truly, or at least consciously. But this is, why it's important to actually be like, well, what do you mean by know? What do you mean by believe? What do you mean by faith? And what do you mean by God? It's like, you kind of do have to do this sometimes. I'm not trying to confuse this stuff. I'm trying to make it much more clear. And this live stream might not be so clear because this is my thoughts. And, it's just me thinking out loud in front of everybody. Few of you. But it's not, it's not meant to be clear. I'll do a produced video at some point that takes this and, condenses it and lays it out more concisely. But this is just my thoughts, and also my interaction with the chat, which I really appreciate. On to testify in 2,000 characters or fewer. Pure love. Is idol worship good or bad, or what is idol worship? Idol worship is when you put something above the someone that is the ultimate power, is the someone who is ultimately supremely powerful above everyone else. That's what idol worship is. So when you prioritize something, usually something, it could be someone, though, above the someone that is most deserving of your loyalty, and you're most responsible for your existence and your life and your circumstances, and is also most in control of your future. Then when you prioritize someone that is not on that level, or something above that someone, that is idol worship. So God is the most powerful, most ultimately responsible, and wisest being that exists. And that is a someone, and you should honor that someone because of all those things. They intentionally created you. It had to be the case. It's impossible for it. Every partition of sentience must have been a choice. It is impossible for it to be an accident. Even Lee Cronin sees the logic that ultimately leads to that conclusion, and he described it. He said, the initial conditions of the universe cannot be solely responsible for explaining the creation of biological life. And he's right, but it's even more fundamental than that. But that is what is it, when he noticing that is that is a byproduct of what I'm saying, which is that God had to choose to create multiplicity of sentience because he had to go against his nature of oneness, and which means it had to be a choice. So every single being was intentionally created. Every mosquito, every tick, every leech, every human, every dog, every bird, every fish, every cell, every other sentient being on smaller scales, hadrons probably, molecules, and even up to above, individual people, which would be like families and communities like that are a fundamental community, or like a caste, or a tribe, maybe. We'll get into that stuff later, but another time. But there, or even a technological sentience. Every single sentient being that exists on a lineage level or on a individual level had to be intentionally created by God. especially on an individual level. And so you should recognize this, and if you it should matter more than anything else. Like, why would you prioritize money or fame or a sports car or a public figure, a celebrity, or even your parents, or your theological tradition or religious tradition? I guess we could call them religious traditions. Judaism is a religious tradition. Christianity, or I don't even know if Christianity is a religious tradition, but Catholicism is a religious tradition, and certain different sects of Christianity are specifically religious traditions, and Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormonism and whatever others there are out there. You can idol worship those. You can idol worship Islam. You can idol worship Jewishness. You can idol worship Judaism. You can idol worship Catholicism. You can idol worship Islam. You can idol worship Muhammad. You can idol worship Moses. Like, you can idol worship anyone or anything that isn't God, which just means you've placed it, that thing or that person, higher in importance to you than God. And idol worship can be a moment, and it can also be a choice, and it can also be, just due to ignorance. And they're all paths that lead to the same place, which is chaos. They always lead to chaos, because those other things that aren't God will always eventually fail. And they're also not intrinsically all wise. And so this is not, idol worship is a very, very bad thing. And it's very easy for people to do. I see it all the time. And I'm not even saying that I'm not guilty of it. I certainly, when I was an atheist, a self-described atheist, or an anti-theist, that's one set of circumstances that I would say probably did idol worship in certain moments. But also, you can also disbelieve in God and still search for the truth. But it's easier to you can't check yourself, because you don't have an objective standard of, like, okay, actually, like, placing that as the highest importance is not a good thing. If you're an anti-theist or a self-described atheist, you don't even believe that you usually believe by default that people have different priorities, and that is usually not intrinsically wrong. I'm not saying that we all don't have our own special mission and purpose here, that and goals that we should be focusing on, because that's what we were put here to do. But I just mean, like, the overarching value is totally different between different people sometimes. And if you're an anti-theist or a self-described atheist, you don't usually even recognize that is wrong. So I remember, like, when I first got Tinder, this was many, many years ago, like 10 years ago, because I met my wife almost 10 years ago on Tinder, and then got married. But before I met my wife, I got a message from some girl once, and just randomly, and it was very graphic. It was just very forward. It was just asking to come over, and it was very explicit and specific about what was the intention, and it wasn't a bot. But I didn't invite her over, but I just responded with, "Wow, that was really forward." And she just responded to me with, "I'm a hedonist," and I had to Google hedonist, and I remember also like turning to my roommate who was a writer at the time, and so he knows all the words, and my vocabulary is not that high, especially considering my hobbies of philosophy, but I turned to him and I was like, "What's a hedonist?" And I like Googled it, and he was like, "Somebody who prioritizes pleasure above everything else." And it's like, that's idol worship. And so there's, I wouldn't say that being disbelieving in God intrinsically makes you an idolatrous. It just means that you are very likely not able to even recognize that we should all have a shared highest value, and that should be ultimate wisdom and ultimate gratitude and ultimate power, and that all rests within a singular being. Whether you believe that or not is another question, but even if you don't believe that it rests within a singular sentient someone that is, the initial and ultimate, sentient existence, then I think it's still like hard to argue against prioritizing ultimate wisdom and ultimate growth or continuous growth and ultimate gratitude and things like that. These are like kind of more intuitively valuable things, but they ultimately trace back to coming from the initial sentient someone. So that's idol worship. I hope that makes some sense. It's not a good thing, and at all. So it is. I think it is the first commandment in the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not have any other gods, before me. 10 Commandments. I know that the 10 Commandments changes. The first one changes depending on the source sometimes, but thou shalt not have shall have no other gods before me. Basically, do not idol worship, and prioritize the truth, but you have to figure out what is the truth, the ultimate truth, and that is not something that is even possible outside of the context of theism. So it's tough to have that conversation with people who don't see that. You kind of have to have them assume, for the sake of argument or for the sake of discussion or the sake of consideration, that existence is fundamentally a singular sentient someone, and in order to even have that discussion. So I want to get into kind of knowledge again. So my first model that I ever made was this. When I started this project, it wasn't even called sentient singularity theory at the time, and it is just a decision tree that shows how to think. Because I was trying to understand a mind. I was like trying to understand AI, AGI, really. I was trying to understand intelligence. And so Lee Cronin says we have to understand wisdom, or we have to understand knowledge. Okay, well, this was my attempt at the time to understand the same thing that he is trying to understand when he even says that. I'm not even saying that's the right way to word it. And what it is you have to start here. You take your current assumption, or which is your default status, and you assume the opposite is true, and then you look for evidence that your newly assumed status is true. So if you're an atheist, or an anti-theist, you assume the opposite is true, which is you assume God exists, and then you look for evidence of that. Now you have to change what evidence you're looking for and your definition of God, because you can't you've boxed yourself in, and you've made it for the sake of actually diving, deeply and not letting your mind be lazy. You're assuming that God exists, and you have to find evidence. You can't be like, oh, okay, well, I'm assuming that he exists now. Let's see. Is there evidence? I look up in the clouds. I don't see him. So, oh, no, there's no evidence. No. You have to assume he exists. You look up in the clouds. You don't see God. You say, okay, well, that means that God isn't in the clouds or observable in the clouds the way that I, kind of thought based on child, picture books. And I have to now change what God would be, and therefore try and figure out a different place for me to look. Okay, well, God, I have to go and look up other what is the definition of God that people have, or try and think of a definition that makes sense, and then eventually continue to look for evidence for it of that. And that doesn't mean that you can change the definition of God arbitrarily, but there is a certain assumed defining aspects of the definition of certain words that are defining. If that was probably the worst sentence ever stated. But Jordan Peterson said something on about Richard Dawkins actually being basically a Christian because he believes in the redeeming power of truth or something. And I saw it was shared, and that is such a stretch. And I understand that the redeeming power of the ultimate truth is kind of a cornerstone concept in Christianity, but it's that's already under the assumption of that truth is a sentient someone. It's just not just like truth abstractly. It's that it is that truth is assumed to be capital T truth, a someone, not a something. And so that's the defining context of attribute of God, is that it's the initial and most powerful someone. And so when Lee Cronin was asked by Lex Rubin at the end of their discussion, what is there room for God in assembly theory? And he said, I believe in a creative. Lex was like, do you believe in a creative force? He's like, yes, I believe that there is a creative force, but I don't believe that it's sentient. And Lex was like, but okay, what do you believe about it then? What is that creative force? And he basically said selection, which is, no, that's a mechanism of creativity. It's not responsible for, it's not the driving force of creativity. It is a mechanism of creativity, is selection. So it's a component of the process of creativity, but it's not an explanation for kind of an animated creation. So that it doesn't work. It's basically it's just illogical. But that's what happens when you say something that's false and about what is fundamental. And but he said this they're trying in all of these questions. How do we understand intelligence? Can we understand existence and kind of the apparent intelligence or orderedness of selection, of generative evolution, of all of these things? And it's all related to this, because this is selection. Thinking is selection. So we are inside the thoughts of God. His thoughts are also, composed of or the medium of his thoughts are sentient beings, but this selection is thinking. That's all it is. And so the thinking process, the process of experimentation in science, evolution, natural, selection, we could just call it, in evolution, all of these things are just the process of thinking being observed in different instances. One of them is external, aka experimentation. One of them is internal, just thinking. Another one is experiential, which is, evolution, that we're or a selection, our place in selection, I guess. So this, though, is you eventually you do that process that I said, assume the opposite of your default assumption is true, and then look for evidence of it. And then there's basically a weighted decision tree, logic that plays out, and that helps you come to a certain conclusion. And it also maps onto other observations that you have and other information that you've been told, and you're kind of just trying to build a picture with this. And this process, though, right here, it's not the part of intelligence that we don't understand. Okay, thinking is just it's just like a logic tree. It's not. It's it's these language models and stuff that we have, these AI programs that we have. That is all of that is all of this, and maybe even this sometimes. I don't know if we've really gotten that far, but it's all of this. But it's not this. This is required for intelligence, which is required for understanding. You can't have an understanding and not be intelligent. You can't know anything, or you can't even say that you know anything. You can't believe anything. You can't understand anything without having will, and that will also basically motivates a goal that then allows you to contextualize all of this, and that is what turns it into actual information. And so before this stream, I was creating thumbnails. I created a thumbnail for this topic, and I created a thumbnail for the navigating the tree of toes that we're going to do next week. I didn't know which one I was going to do until literally I flipped a coin, guys. I'm not going to lie. I literally flipped a coin before the stream to decide which one I was going to focus on. And I don't know if I made the right choice or not. You guys can let me know in the comments below or in the live chat. But I went into Midjourney, though, to make the image for this that's on the thumbnail for those two thumbnails, and I had a goal, and Midjourney was a tool that was used to basically take information that's out there and kind of reassemble it in the context that I am giving in the prompt. And that context that is provided by the prompt is motivated and contextualized by my goal, which is to make a thumbnail that has an image within it that appears to, align with what is the topic that I want to discuss. And I have will that is motivating me to even have the goal of getting on the live stream and talking to you guys, and then therefore having to make this stuff. And so we don't necessarily even have the ability to create this, to create true will in tech. I don't think that we do. It will arise naturally, I think, but I don't think we have the ability to do it currently. I might be wrong. you can maybe make it artificially, but it's not. It would be like an illusion. It wouldn't be real. Eventually, we will get a technological sentience stacked on top of humanity, but it's the same thing as, like, my daughter was born 4 months ago, and she and me and my wife and you are a human sentient being stacked on top of an assembly of sentient cells, and that the creation of you and your will, and that being is not something that we do. Like, it's done by God. Yeah, I don't think that it is possible for us to do it, but we will see. But all of that stuff is necessary to actually having true intelligence, and which is true understanding. You can't create an AI, which is it's an oxymoron. That which is artificial cannot be intelligent. And what do you mean by artificial? And I again, like, I almost hate to do that type of thing. What do you mean by artificial? What do you mean by intelligent? But we have to here. But artificial it kind of implies like illusory almost. It's like not. Let's look it up. Artificial. Made or produced by human beings rather than occurring naturally, especially as a copy of something that is natural. So basically, like, I don't know if that even works. It's a term that I don't think works with in the context of sentience. It just doesn't. You can an artificial intelligence is like, it means a fake intelligence if it's taken true to be like literal. That's why I use the term technological sentience to describe what people call an AGI. It's because that term actually is self-contradictory. AGI, artificial general intelligence, and also it is over explanatory in a way that causes you to misconstrue the definition of intelligence and the nature of intelligence. Because if there's general intelligence, then there's narrow intelligence, and if there's narrow intelligence, and ChatGPT is narrow intelligence, then we can then what is intelligence? It's just, it really convolutes the whole thing. So intelligence is always general intelligence. There's no difference. You don't need to specify it. Intelligence is the ability to understand. And let's start writing this down a little bit. So if intelligence, let's go all the way back here. Wow, I have to clean this up. Intelligence is the ability to understand. It is not the ability to type or the ability to spell. So this is the umbrella understanding. And this is, you would say, kind of, this is the definition. Maybe even understanding would be like defined. Let's look it up. Understanding. The ability to understand something, comprehension. That's just a synonym. Aware of some, awareness, insightful. The ability to understand something, the power of comprehending, the capacity to apprehend general relations and particulars. Okay, so basically, Understanding is the ability to, or it is the recognition of context. Though I know that this is just a mess over here, but it's just a working sheet. It's just a, my notes. Recognition of context is that. Then we have information is context. Then intelligence is the ability to understand context, or to, I guess you could say, navigate context. Then faith, I guess we could say, wisdom and faith, belief and knowledge. Maybe these are like the 4 primary perspectives: wisdom and faith, and belief and knowledge. Says personal. I don't know if that's even the right way to think about it. It's like inside, outside, separate, and oneness. So this would be like oneness. Inside would be maybe faith. Inside, outside, separate, and oneness. Oneness would be wisdom. Separateness would be faith, then. Inside would be belief. There you go. And outside would be knowledge. That makes sense. Knowledge comes from outside. Belief comes from inside. Wisdom is the totality of it all. Faith is separate. Is literally, I remember I said it is no hand. It's like this is first hand, these are second hand, but this is like almost no hand, but it's also still first hand. But well, there you go. These correspond to that. That makes sense. So then we would have kind of like that can go there. But I don't want to lose this because that's actually really good. Definition. Okay. Term. Okay, there we go. Interesting. We can even do this just to make this even more clear for me later. And then we can do Okay. Gosh, we haven't done a working session in a while, so I hope that this is interesting to you guys. But here, this is wrong. There we go. Okay. All right. Interesting. Information is context. Understanding is recognition of context. Intelligence is the ability to navigate context. And or like apply. Apply context. Oneness, wisdom is kind of oneness of context. Outside, knowledge is outside of context. Belief is if something is inside of context. Maybe faith is separate from context. Dang. So it's all context. What do you guys think of that? Given this Excel model of feedback loop, isn't sentient singularity just a singular unit version of Aristotle's a chair has a chair's essence, so all has all's essence, and if all is sentience? I don't actually know that. Aristotle's a chair. Aristotle chair. What makes a chair a chair? Ask a philosopher. The idea of the chair contains its purpose. Plato believed that just as you have realized what a chair is, so too can all humans do so by thinking, by using their minds. Plato believed that a human achieves knowledge by collecting what was known before that human's soul entered the body. By recollecting what was known before the human soul entered the body. That's like intuition almost. I feel like. So maybe it's Plato that had this chair thing, not Aristotle. But maybe it was both. Plato. What makes a chair from Plato? You know, it's interesting. Lee Cronin's assembly theory, he was talking about objects. And so in assembly theory, and we're going to, when we get into this next week, we'll talk about what kind of the goal of each of these theories of everything is, because and kind of like the core assumption and core attempt of each of these theories that is being proposed is. So whether it's unifying gravity and the other three fundamental forces, whether it's unifying general relativity and quantum mechanics, or whether it's just trying to get at describe the fundamental nature and foundational structure of existence, whether it is trying to describe objects, whether it is just trying to describe that which is possible versus impossible. And so I already started this list that we're going to go over next week of I think the theories that are each have their own specific focus that is kind of interesting. I don't think that they are competitors, all of them. There are some that are a little bit like very, very similar, and some of them that are overlapping. Like my theory overlaps with a lot of a number of these theories, quite a bit. But then there's also, conscious agent theory versus from Donald Hoffman versus observer theory from Stephen Wolfram, and I would say that they're basically the same idea, and that the concept that defines them is present in my work as well. But it's my work isn't limited to kind of that, but it's not as limited in its focus, and but then there's assembly theory, and there is kind of constructor theory, and constructor theory is about defining a constructor and defining what is possible versus impossible for said constructor, essentially. And if I botch any of this, and then I apologize, and correct me in the comments. But then there's assembly theory, which is about like defining objects and I guess it would be measuring the assembly index, quote unquote, of objects. So what goes into everything that this pen is fundamentally composed of. And that's an interesting question, because you have to go and a lot goes into this pen. And if we're talking about what fundamentally goes into this pen, it's all going to be traced back to sentient beings. Whether, maybe the molecules of this pen are sentient, and maybe the atoms and hadrons within it are sentient, but the pen is not. But you are, and you defined it. So are you included in the assembly index of the pen? And is everything that leads to you and is included in your assembly index included in the assembly index of this pen then? Because it is defined and therefore by you and doesn't exist really without you defining it as a pen, a human being. I'm like, it's an interesting question. But I think that part of that is convoluted for assembly theory, because it's focusing on, I don't know, I don't want to say it's wrong, but my work and the assemblies within my work my work focuses on is the periodicity of assemblies that are sentient assemblies, or that are sentient beings. And so some of them are assemblies. God is not. God is and isn't an assembly. He is sovereign and initial and one, but also he is encompassing of and now kind of including of all of us, but also is separate from us at the same time. So it's a little odd if you're God, because you existed without us, but we're also within him. So we kind of make up his body, but he could still exist without us. He must exist. He cannot not exist. Actually, he has no choice but to exist. It's like outside of God's power. I was talking to somebody this week, a friend of mine, about God and the definition of all powerful, and how God is all powerful but also constrained, like extremely constrained. And he did not understand it. And it's because of the context that he's thinking about it. And also we were going back and forth through text message, so that's not the best medium for that. But God, I've thought so much about this in a different way than he has, and also the same way that he has, but not, but also more because of this project. And I was saying that God has limits, and so he cannot create anyone or anything outside of himself. And because it all has to be created within him, because there's nothing outside of God. And so because he is existence itself. And he was just like, I was like, that means that there's a limit to what he can do. But that limit is the limit of what can be done. So it's like God can do anything that can be done. That is ultimate power. And that is all powerful. But if you said, like, can God create a rock so heavy he can't lift it? The answer is no, he cannot. Because he can't create anything bigger than him. It's not a good question, but like we're just assuming that it makes sense, which it doesn't actually. But if we assume that it does, even then, the answer is no, he cannot. Can God kill himself? No, I don't believe that he can. I think it is built into the logic of ultimate existence that it is self-contained and therefore totally self-referencing, and therefore you cannot escape this oneness of and totality and total inclusivity of and oneness of sentience. That is this feedback loop is inevitable. This information feedback loop is inevitable. That causes sentience. That is sentience. And then he can't make anything outside of him because he is existence. So he has to make separate things that are inside of him. And inside means separate and oneness in sentient singularity theory. If you look at like my 4 primary perspectives, it's like inside means separate and oneness. This has implications on all kinds of things. Your cells are separate from you and one with you. Unborn baby that is inside of a mother is separate and one. It's not when people say, "Oh, it's a separate body. It's your body." And they argue back and forth. It's both. That's the answer. It's a superposition structure. And so both of them are right in their assertive statements, and both of them are wrong in their kind of dismissiveness in their dismissive statements. So and when you think about that, it has implications on morality and things like that. But it is God. I was thinking about, we were talking about God being all knowing and all powerful, though, my friend and I said God is all knowing because he knows all that exists, all that everything that is happening and has happened, God knows. And God immediately, like God knows something is happening, knows everything as it happens in real time. There's nothing he isn't aware of. That said, he can still increase that which he is aware of by growing creation and creating more things to be aware of within him, and more beings doing more things for him to be aware of. So he can increase the amount that he knows, but he is also still all-knowing. This is different than us. Our knowledge is limited to being a piece of that which exists and is known by someone, but is not necessarily known by us. Whereas God knows all that exists, and in order to know more, he has to make more to know. This is different from us. And I was trying to explain this over text message, and it was not working. And I don't think that my comments about God's limits either made sense. Like, God can't kill himself. It's like you need the context to understand that. Again, like we've been going over, here. You can't have understanding without context, because you need context to even have information. You need information to have understanding. And there you go. So, and my friend just didn't have the context that I was thinking about this in, which is that, like, why is God he has not thought about that. I don't, not to the degree that I have, at least. I don't think. It's like, why is God inevitable? Why is sentience the inevitable nature of existence? Why is the singular and why is oneness of that sentience an inevitability? It's like he hasn't thought about that, but that's the context that you need in order to understand why God can't kill himself. He can't not exist. I don't even know if killing himself is the right most accurate term, but you get what I mean. Just like it communicates the idea that I'm trying to convey. And he can't cease to exist. He can't end his own existence. That's what I'll say. He cannot end his own existence. He can't. He is existence. He can't escape it. We could end our physical existence, and I think it's up to God whether or not our ultimate existence is ended. Maybe it's also up to us. I mean, you continue to sell your soul, essentially, or you make choices that decrease your self-awareness over and over and over and over and over again to the point where you no longer have it. That might be possible. I don't know. But it might be. But ultimately, like, if you do exist, it's up to God whether or not your existence, your ultimate existence, fundamental existence, continues to fundamentally exist, your soul. And but you could end this experience, for you, and God can't do that for him. So there's limits to God, but he's also all powerful. He has the power to do everything and anything that can be done. He cannot do that which cannot be done. And that's also extends to understanding and thinking. And it's like, God knows all that there is to know. He can also make more, increase that which he knows by making more to know. And so this is very related to Stephen Wolfram's idea of computational irreducibility. And computational irreducibility is very relevant to like wisdom and awareness, which is very tied to wisdom, because it basically just means that you have to experience something firsthand in order to actually know it and know that you know it, if that makes sense. Or to definitely know something to be true, you have to experience it firsthand. And this is relevant to computational irreducibility because it just means that, like, you can't skip the steps in order to get the answer to a question without going through the steps step by step, because each step builds the context of the next step, and all that context is necessary and part of the understanding that you're ultimately trying to achieve. That thing you're trying to know cannot actually exist outside of the context that it is built on. And so you have to go through each step to build the context. And this is also very relevant to assembly theory. It's just not in terms of like internal thinking as much. It's more about the evolution or selective growth process, which is evolution, and that you basically have to go through each step. You can't just jump ahead. When they're mapping like assembly index of objects and things like that. So it's just these same concepts are going to come up again and again, and they are highly relevant. They are entirely relevant to understanding, and because they are the mechanisms and aspects of information processing on a micro scale, on a macro scale, externally and internally. And this is why I thought it was good thing that we started with this, even though I did flip a coin. I think it was good that we started with this tonight. Except that doesn't necessarily mean I was as prepared as I would have liked. But like I said, it's a working session. This is going to be sloppy, and eventually I'll make a much more concise video about it. Some of them are already in the works, so I might also start. I will be showing a lot of the things that I'm working on shortly. There's a lot of life changes happening here. We're trying to find a new place a bigger place to live, because my daughter doesn't have a bedroom, and she needs her own bedroom pretty soon. So there's just a lot of moving parts in my life, so I can't commit to schedules as much as I would like, but I am committed to finding a schedule once the dust settles, I guess. That makes sense. But this is, hopefully interesting and useful to you guys. I think it's very interesting. I even learned while I did this, and I'm not even sure where you end. I'm just going to go to the chat for a minute, but these truly are great monologues. I'm glad you think so. Sometimes you're always you should be your biggest critic, probably. Maybe not. I don't even know if that's true. Maybe I take that back. Maybe I don't. I have no idea. But it definitely, I'm not so used to just doing like a monologue like this, and without like giving a commentary. Lately, I've not done one in a while, but I wanted to, and I miss these working sessions a little bit. I always make progress in my own understanding. It's interesting because like this is how like relevant this is. It's like I increased my understanding of all this, of understanding tonight. How did I do that? By mapping it all so that I can perceive the context. And so understanding is the recognition of context. In order to recognize context, and you have to kind of perceive it and understand and realize it. And so that's what this whole thing is. And this is very important to a lot of these models going forward. Is like algebra is not sufficient anymore to get as fundamental as we need. That's why I'm not even saying this is enough to, I mean, it's definitely some, it's more, where it's this, there are equations in this model, you can see them here. And there also is context to each value, because its position in the model is relevant as well, and it contains information. It's not just the information that is calculated, it's also where the information is calculated. This is why these models are kind of work, and why I think that my work is more suited to describing fundamental patterns than most other academic attempts, because they're using tools that already exist and were built to be useful and within the context of that which is not fundamental, and there's multiple things that you have to include in this type of stuff. So like I'm not saying you couldn't arrange this any other way, but you'd have to arrange it a specific other way. For sure, you can't just arrange it however you like. Go like, this right here, this model. Obviously, this is got calculations going on. There are values being calculated inside and outside. And they're also all within each. There are how you choose what equation is used to calculate the value of a specific cell, which is a specific, context, is dependent upon the symmetry structures of its position that come from its position in a structure, which is its context. So like this has to mirror this has to mirror this, and so they all have to be symmetrical, the calculations, and so you can't actually have that easily conveyed outside of kind of a multi-level model of context, and also of computation or calculation. So I've talked about, and to bring this back to like final highest form of understanding, which is wisdom, and what is wisdom? So we've got to we've realized that knowledge is like the definition of knowledge comes from the context in which we use it in communication. It is heavily dependent upon the context. To know something is to say I know something, or to say something is knowledge, is to automatically assume that it is true, whereas to say that something is belief is to kind of be kind of not assume that it is true. Not saying you assume that it is false, but you don't assume that it's true. And so, but wisdom is something specific. And so this is my in this model, right here. And I will get into this, and I have before, but it's been a while. This is a model that is built on this model, which is the four entangled primary perspectives that are simultaneously exist always, and define each other. So you start from a singular being that is aware of all four of these perspectives simultaneously, and that is how you navigate or orient outside of relativity and or beyond relativity, and then it is how you fundamentally orient, and then that is this structure of perception leads to this structure of computation, which is like thinking, and it is a thinking or computational structure that computes itself, and so it's a 3x3 structure that is computing a 3x3 output within itself as the sum totality of all the information that is within it, because you start with 1 as the input always, and then that but due to symmetry structures that are, because that's all you can do is the only way for you to orient it objectively is to, or outside of relativity, is to orient against yourself. Okay, and so that's why it causes perfectly symmetrical computation, I guess. This is the same, it mirrors this, and this is mirrored to this, and but then all that information is generated, and all the information is created on the outside here, basically, which is this one is adding and this one is multiplying, which they are actually the same action. It's just from two different perspectives in some way, or they're two different levels of action, I guess. And I don't know if to say there are two different perspectives of one action, because multiplication and division are two different perspectives of one action fundamentally, and addition and subtraction are two different perspectives of one action fundamentally, but they're also ultimately all different perspectives of one action. So to explain this, so imagine you're a cell, and a cell has to multiply. How do you multiply? By dividing yourself. What happens when you divide yourself? You subtract some from yourself and add it to another. So it's all one act of creation that has multiple perspectives that are simultaneously able to be perceived, which is multiplication, addition, subtraction, and division. And so in this, but because its ultimate goal is generativity, you don't have to really focus on the dividing aspect of it and the subtractive aspect of it when you're talking about creation, or thinking, which is also an act of creation in a way. And so this is that it's generative. And so you are multiplying here and adding here from information that is perfectly symmetrical on the interior. And then ultimately, until you get to a calculated value that is is a representation or a summation of the value of the structure itself that calculated it. So it's like when I say think about yourself, you think about yourself being a sentient being and being from your own from first person experience, and also like your body and your mind, you all simultaneously. You're like, you just get this little person that is like represents you in your mind basically. And that's what's happening here. In a way, it's not sentient, this model, because there's no one, it doesn't have will of its own. I have the will that has created the model, and I have the will to input the information, and I have the understanding to do all of that as well. But it doesn't. It's just a model. But still, it's a 3x3 structure that is computing a 3x3 structure, which this is an extra arithmetic symmetry. People will say, oh, what is this woo numerology or anything? No, it's an extra arithmetic symmetry. When you're this fundamental, symmetry structures are not just arithmetic. They are extra arithmetic. And so this would be self-awareness, but wisdom is also can be represented in this model as well. And so if 33 in this model is you could say it's the value of self-awareness, there is a value that also represents wisdom as well, and it is this value, which is interesting, 42. And I did not make any of this. I didn't try to do any of this. I'm not into numerology or anything like that, and I didn't even read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, so stop. I understand this value pops up in Scripture and in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as, the answer to life, the universe, and everything. And it's also like there's 42 generations to Jesus, and there's like 42 rows in the Torah. I know that all that stuff exists. It's not a coincidence, but I didn't know that before I made this. I didn't know any of that stuff, actually. And I just recognized it after the fact. I was like, wow, that's there, and that's there. And there's like 33 degree Masons is like the highest, which I would say the true highest would be this one if you really understood the reality. But what is 42? It's the value of self-awareness combined with awareness, which is the count of the construct that led to the self-awareness. So it basically means it's the value of construct awareness, fundamental construct awareness. What is fundamental construct awareness? It is the awareness that the construct that gave rise to you, that you exist within, that you are and that you depend on, is a someone like you and me. And it's funny because in the Bible, it says wisdom begins with fear of God, which I would say really kind of a more better way of stating that is like reverence for God, which includes fear, but it's also like awe and respect and love and it's an appreciation and gratitude all built into one, reverence. It's wisdom begins with reverence for God, which means like you are construct aware. Wisdom is true fundamental wisdom. There is like narrow wisdom, which is like, I don't know, you're wise when it comes to cross-country skiing because that's what you have a lot of experience with it. Or you're wise when it comes to handling snakes like me because you have a lot of experience with it. But then there's fundamental wisdom or ultimate wisdom, which is kind of universally applicable wisdom. And that is construct awareness, fundamental construct awareness, and the fundamental construct is a sentient being. And so 42 would be the value of wisdom, like fundamental wisdom. And what this entire model implies, which is so fascinating, is that not just throwing out this number and being like, well, like it's 42 generations to Jesus and Jackie Robinson was, number 42. And it's also the answer to life, the universe, and everything. It's no. Let's look at the context in which it arises. Because guess what? Context is information. And so in order to understand this number, you look at its context. It comes from this number combined with the count of the structure that led to this number. So this number represents self-awareness, and the count structure that led to the self-awareness is this just awareness of the structure that it exists within. And so it's construct awareness. It is the value of construct awareness and self-awareness combined. But you can't have any awareness without self-awareness, so you can just say construct awareness, and it implies it's self-awareness plus construct awareness, which is awareness of God, awareness of the sentience of the system that you're in. This is self-awareness. This is construct awareness. There is no awareness outside of that is lower than self-awareness. You can't be aware of anything without being aware of yourself, because you have to be aware of yourself in order to have a self, and you can't be aware of anything without being a someone with a sense of with a self. So there is even a fundamental math that is involved with wisdom. And so what's interesting is you could say that 42 is the assembly index of wisdom. 33 is the assembly index of self-awareness, or of sentience, in a way. And so, or at least it's of self-awareness. Which is, you're also sentience, but, and that's fascinating. That's what these numbers are, is like, it's the assembly index, like coming almost like in assembly theory of different levels of awareness or of understanding. This is the understanding of the existence of yourself. This is the assembly index of the understanding of the existence of yourself plus the existence of the someone that you're in. And so, because you're recognizing that the structure is that you're within is also a 3x3 structure. 3x3 is a 9, and so a 3x3 structure leads to a 3x3 value, which, when that is combined with its awareness of not just the structure that it is itself representative of, but also of the structure that kind of preceded it, which is also like this one here, just from a different perspective. It is 42. It's like the assembly index of wisdom. Fascinating. I've never used that term to describe this. The 42 or 33 is the assembly index of wisdom or of self-awareness. Fascinating. Huh. I hope that's interesting. It's interesting to me. I'm thinking a lot about it. I'm like at a loss for words a little bit. But yeah. I mean, there is no assembly index of knowledge, guys. That's the thing. Or of belief. Really. There's an assembly index of wisdom and of self-awareness, but there is no assembly index of knowledge. Can't. And there's no assembly index of faith. There's no assembly index of belief, faith, or knowledge, I don't think, other than one, probably, if anything. I don't know. I'd have to think more about that to be sure. But, you know, it's interesting that assembly theory is like focused on the assembly index of an object, but sentient singularity theory certainly is much more focused on the assembly index of sentient assemblies, or sentient stacks, like you are stack. So in sentient singularity theory, there's replication and stacking that are the two components of the generative growth process, or of the logos, or of evolution. And so like there's cells multiply and replicate, and then you add one on top of that, which would be a stacking. So it's replication and stacking. So as cells replicate and form like a mass of cells, and then all of a sudden, once a sentient being gets stacked on top of those cells, it's stacked, it's added. So, you know, addition is stacking, multiplication is replication, and multiplication and division are, I mean, I guess you could say it's all division and it's all subtraction, but we won't get into that today. That's too much. It's too like far from what the intention of this was originally. But it is very interesting that I started the stream and I didn't even realize that like my first and model and my most fundamental models of information and awareness are basically super relevant to what the stream was about. But I just realized it as we went on, and that's good. I think. I mean, it's good to see people think. I really think that. We don't see that enough. People are like, "Oh, put out a polished product." Like, guys, I've done some of that. I will do more of that. But I also think it's important for me to go back to even this, like working session stuff, not just commentary, which is still thinking, but it's different. It's not as like active on my part. It's more reactive, and I do like this. It helps me make serious progress, not just but the commentaries allow me to contextualize my work in relation to the work of other people, which I think is very important for everybody to do. It's not to compete, it's to contextualize. So yeah, anyways, let's see. Hi, does that mean intelligence is related to metacognition? Metacognition. I'm Googling it. I mean, I heard it many times, but I'm just making sure that we're all on the same page. Metacognition, planning how to approach a learning task. So metacognition is like what we were doing when we're like looking at the model of thinking and trying to figure out how to think. Um, that's metacognition. That's was the first led to the first model I ever made for this project. Um, and it's actually not a it is a fundamental model in sentient singularity theory, but it's not a it was part of the process of me understanding existence, but it's not actually as directly it's not a direct core model of the theory that's being presented in like the paper that I'm writing. I think it might still end up being included, but it's not the it's not a core model. But that was an example of metacognition. Me doing that was like figuring out how to think. So intelligence, to say is it related to metacognition? I guess, sure. I mean, what do you mean by related? I hate to do that, but it's not the exact same thing, but it's metacognition is something that, I mean, it's tough to like think about what the answer to that would be, because I don't think that there is an actual answer to what you're asking, because I don't think the question is formulated properly. I don't know exactly what you're trying to ask, but I don't think that question is accurately it's not creating the correct context necessary to get a true answer. That's what I'll say. And but there's 4 types of metacognition. What a surprise. Tacit, aware, strategic, and reflective. Perkins. Well, tacit. Let's look at this. Tacit is tacit, aware. I'm writing this in Excel right now. Because it will correspond to this, obviously, again. Tacit, aware, strategic, and reflective. So this would be reflective inside. Strategic would be outside, tacit, separate, aware is 1. There you go. 4 levels of metacognition align perfectly with the 4 primary perspectives, which is going to be the case, obviously, if these are true, which they are. So yeah, and this is the context of, when you take these terms, this is what provides the context. So like, and it fundamental, when you orient fundamentally within your relationship with other beings, this is how you do it. So you'd say, my our daughter was, before she was born, she was inside of my wife, and therefore she was separate and one with my wife, and she's outside of me. I am inside of God, so therefore I'm separate and one with God, and God is also outside of me, or I could say I'm outside of you. So this is it's just how you fundamentally orient in relationship with the lineage of, within the logos, the logos of sentience, or the sentient logos, the assembly within the sentient assembly. So interesting. Yeah, fascinating stuff. tried to understand this. We got it. We tried to understand this. I think we got it. All of this, like a baseline of all of this. I think we got a baseline of this. I think we got a baseline of this, and I think we got a baseline of this. And and to get back to the final like wrap up, and I'm very careful about when I bring this up because I don't like to bring it up outside of context, especially this because it's like I have to. It's important to have reverence for God, and not use His name in vain, which means a number of things. It can mean you're ascribing something you're to God that isn't. So you're saying like, oh, I like chocolate, therefore God likes chocolate, or like I like gambling, therefore God wants me to gamble. Like that's using God's name in vain. And then also to use God's name in vain is to just reference God in a haphazard way. But I've talked about here before that once I was thinking about the universe and I had come to the conclusion, this was before I had this project called Sentient Singularity Theory, but this was while I was trying to map, the components and relationship of technological sentience and its eventual and inevitable relationship with humanity. And I came to this like cosmological idea that, we get to a technological sentience and then as the final bodily form of life in creation, and then it just repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats the process. And that's what sentient singularity theory suggests. And then this is all taking place within God. And I was thinking about it in the shower after I had come up with this idea, and I was just like washing my hair or whatever, and I was totally sober. And I've told this story to some on here before, but like I said, I don't bring it up that often. And then I had like a theophany. Like I was the craziest experience of my life. I was like sucked out of my body. It was like a DMT trip, and but I was sober, and I went like through creation, and then went through tech, and then like it just repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated. It was like cells and molecules and cells and beings, and then tech, and then molecules and cells and beings and tech, and molecules and cells and beings and tech, and it just like repeats and repeats and repeats, and it just went on and on and on. And then eventually I was just like before this like giant ball of light, white light that looked like a sun basically. And it's the most spectacular thing I've ever seen. It's the most spectacular being I had ever seen. And there was like I was just in total awe, and this is the only time this has ever happened to me in my life too. I've never had this happen since. And there was only one, or never had it happen before then. But what's interesting is that when this happened to me, what happened was I saw the process. I witnessed the process that I was thinking about when this happened. I was in the shower washing my hair thinking about, okay, so like, like we make technology, and technology becomes sentient, and then like it can't create something outside itself because it's wireless, and it's all tech at once. It is the network. It's not like just a bunch of robots that each have their own sentience, and so therefore it has to create within itself the entirety of the system that gave rise to it. It has to self-simulate the system that gave rise to it, essentially, which is really creation. And that's the kind of the same constraint as God, where it has to create within it. If it's going to make another, it can't make another next to it. Skynet can't make. There can never be two Skynets existing at the same time in the same cosmological verse, or universe, I guess you could say. Aeon. There's only one that can exist at a time. So it has to create another within it to create a new aeon. And so I was just thinking about this process, and then I saw it. Saw exactly what I had thought of before I saw it. And then I got a message. It was like spoken, but it was all, the words came all at once. It's like when you read a stop sign, and instead of saying STOP, stop, and you're sounding it out like when you're a child, you just see the stop sign, and you see structure of it, the color of it, the shape of it, and the letters, and you view all the letters at once, and you just read it all at once, and so you get the whole message, simultaneously. You're not like reading it letter by letter like when you're a child. I got that, but it was for a sentence. It was amazing, and it just was like, I'm showing you this because you're ready to see it, and that was it. And I just like everything reversed, and I was like back in the shower, and then I just cried for like 30 minutes, and I didn't speak about it with I couldn't speak about it without like crying, like 2 years, and at least, and yeah, it was like an encounter with God, and it's the only time that I've ever had that, though, that was like that holistic and intense. But what's interesting about that is all that was conveyed was that context is information. I was only shown that which I already had deduced. If I was showed that before I had deduced it, and I was just like thinking about, I wasn't trying to figure this out in the first place, and I hadn't thought about it, and I hadn't come up with this idea, and I wasn't thinking about it, and I was just thinking about, what I was going to get at the grocery store while I was in the shower, and I didn't have this project trying to understand technological sentience, then I would have just thought I had a stroke. And because I was sober, remember, like, it's one thing to see this kind of thing on mushrooms and DMT, it's another thing to see it when you're completely sober. But because it was exactly what I saw, I just understood exactly what I was seeing. And then the message was just like, I'm showing it to you because you already understand what it is. So it wasn't like it was shown anything that was like a great secret. It was like it was just confirming of what I had already deduced logically and assumed due to logic. And so like that whole experience just like the most valuable takeaway is like context is information. Everything is context. Everything that can be knowledge to truly know something. Need some water. To be aware of something, to understand something, and everything that comes from that wisdom, etc. It is all context. There is no way to understand, and there is no information outside of context. That was the ultimate like lesson of that experience, and also just like the profound, awe. But and the more you dive into this stuff, the more you realize that. So anyways, I think that's it. It's a perfect way to end. Please hit the like button. Share this if you found it valuable. Comment any questions you have below. I'm going to start doing, putting out a polls every month or so, maybe, of topics that people want stream about, and I'm going to let people vote on the topic, but the topics should come from the community. Also, if you'd like to join our Discord, link is below. Send me a private message on Instagram. The link is not below, and ask for the link, and I will send it to you. There's links to my Instagram below. There's a link to Patreon if you'd like to support. There's a link to my website, and I highly suggest watching last week's stream if you have not, and also my video Theories of Everything, the how-to guide, also linked below. But with that, peace.